All right. Hello, and welcome to Soul Protocol, your headquarters for the inner revolution. I am Lea Evigt, and this is my first podcast, so forgive me if I flounder. Forgive me as I flounder through it. I became a life coach about a year ago, and I'm really passionate about the work, but I need a place to talk to the people about the things, because talking to you one-on-one is just not enough. It's not enough. So, what am I doing here exactly? I believe that we collectively are part of a revolution. I believe that we collectively are changing the world, especially those of us who are audacious and passionate and willing to take action that other people might not be willing to take, especially that action that aligns with our truest nature. That's what we're going to be talking about on this podcast, how to take action in a way that aligns with our truest nature and how to be part of this revolution that I'm talking about. What's interesting to me about the revolution is that everything that's happening in our society right now is a reflection of something that first happened in ourselves. And I think that's really powerful. If we understand that we cannot create something outwardly that we haven't already created inwardly, now we can get really motivated to do our inner work, to find greater levels of compassion, tolerance, patience, good boundaries, a higher integration of action, and to do all of that in a way that works with our inner nature instead of against it. And that is the real secret sauce. That's when we step into the flow. That's when everything begins to move us along, where we used to think that we had to move ourselves along. We don't. Actually, we get to kind of ride the wave, if you will. And maybe this action of riding the wave is the new revolution. Maybe acting in accordance with our truest selves, acting in accordance with our divine calling is the new revolution. And how cool would it be if the revolution was nonviolent, if the revolution was about intentionality, if the revolution was about connection, if the revolution was about care? How cool would it be to live in a world where humanitarian action was valued as highly as military action was? It's just a thought. We're not tackling all that today. What we're tackling today is the question of the self. It's one of the ultimate questions in spiritual practice. What am I? And I wrestled with it. I still wrestle with it. But now I have my own model for it that I'm going to share with you today that gives me a little bit extra clarity, a little bit extra structure. You'll find as you listen to the podcast that I am all about bridging the gap between the mystic and the practical, the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere, the linear and the circular. I believe this bridging is actually going to be the action that heals us, because we need both, yin and yang. They're both incredibly powerful forces of nature. What have we been doing in this linear society where we really value analytical thinking, but we haven't been valuing intuitive thinking? And one of the questions we come to intuitively, one of the first questions we come to intuitively when we start doing spiritual work, which the podcast is spiritual, but it's also emotional. It's also practical. It's also intellectual. We're going to hit all the angles. because the self, as I've come to know it, is actually comprised of all of these different angles. And denying one denies the whole, because the whole is made of these different parts. So when I first started contemplating this, I was going through a divorce, which is a great time to obliterate the old self and try to build something new. Really, anything that completely devastates you is an awesome opportunity for that. And I, what I understood was this: as I was suffering, I sort of began to, in all of my seeking for an answer, which I did a lot of, I've always been a seeker, I sort of began to ask the question, why am I suffering in different ways? I knew I was suffering emotionally, and I was getting divorced after a 12-year-long relationship, and we had 2 small children. So the emotional suffering was really palpable. And then I knew I was suffering mentally. I was stressed and anxious, scared. My thoughts were all over the place. I knew I was suffering physically. I wasn't sleeping. I was sick. It was hard for me to move my body and work out the way I wanted to, because it was always kind of churning up lots of extra feelings. But the spiritual suffering was new. That was a new experience to me. What I learned was happening there is that I wasn't allowed to be myself. And that was extraordinarily painful. I mean, there's only so much of that you can handle before you have to be honest with yourself about what's working in your life and what's not working. Maybe some of you know what I'm talking about. If you're in a job that isn't aligned for you, if you're in a relationship that isn't aligned for you, it's not to say that it can't be fixed, it can't be healed. That's a lot of what we work on, right? Trying to heal the gap instead of just fail. That's not what we're doing here. But if the gap can't be healed and you stay, oh my God, do we suffer? We suffer so much. And I remember thinking at that time that the thing I wanted more than anything was freedom. And I came to understand that the freedom meant that I wanted to be free to be myself, to be more authentic. So I noticed these sort of different categories of suffering. And I started thinking, well, spiritual, emotional, physical, mental, soul, heart, body, mind. And obviously, I had heard of this notion of the self being comprised of these parts. But actually, not always in these 4 terms. Sometimes it was body, mind, spirit. Sometimes it was mind, body, and heart. A lot of times the heart and the soul were sort of intertwined, but I came to understand them very differently. And I came to understand myself as an ecosystem, not as one thing that operates continuously in perfect integrity. We'll get to that too. But as an ecosystem of different parts that had different needs, different opinions, different ideas about how things should be. And sometimes these parts were at conflict with one another, and that created its own form of suffering. And so, as I came to understand this ecosystem, I started to think, oh, this is so helpful, actually, just to be able to name what's happening in myself, just to be able to say, my heart wants nothing more than for my family to be whole again, but my soul can't get on board with that. And just to be able to begin to identify the different voices of these different parts and the ways in which they were in conflict. It's not to say that it was easy to resolve those inner conflicts, but I did at least have the words to describe them, which felt like progress to me. And this probably came after, I don't know, maybe a year or so of post-divorce suffering and a lot of contemplation, a lot of reading, a lot of podcasts, a lot of books. But this moment that I began to think in terms of an ecosystem was the first moment that I felt I had real clarity. And that is what we're going to be talking about in one shape or another on this podcast going forward. We're going to be coming to a place of greater clarity. We're going to be getting there with honesty. We're going to be getting there with openness. We're going to be getting there with vulnerability. We're going to be getting there with silence and stillness, meditation. And we're going to be exploring all of our dark shadows. If you want to build a new self, the first thing that has to happen is to deconstruct the old self. And it's a messy process. And it's confronting because deconstructing anything will show you all of what's inside. But once that is deconstructed and you get to look at all the parts individually, now you get to decide how to put them back together. So if you're going through something tough, this is a podcast for you. If you're not going through something tough, this is also the podcast for you. This podcast is for people who want to see a better world. And this podcast is for people who want to be part of that change and who are willing to do the work in themselves first to make that happen. So thank you so much for being here. This is my very first podcast. They're only going to get better from here, I promise. But as a display of faith, you can like, subscribe, follow, share. Maybe share this with someone who you think has a internal conflict happening. And please also go out and share your divine self with the world. Love you. And I will see you next week.